This story comes from my best friend's uncle, Daniel, who works the night shift as a police officer in our city. Daniel's been on the force for years, partnered with another officer, Ray. Both of them are military veterans, known for staying calm under pressure, a perfect match for law enforcement. About a year ago, they received a call from an apartment complex manager. The manager reported strange behavior from one of the tenants. Calls like this weren't unusual, so Daniel and Ray didn't expect much when they arrived at the scene around 2 a.m. What struck them as odd, though, was that nearly all the tenants were gathered outside on the lawn, whispering among themselves. The manager approached them, visibly agitated, explaining that a tenant named Evan had turned on all the water in his apartment, flooding the entire building. According to the manager, Evan had been acting strangely for weeks. Daniel and Ray noticed water trickling under the front door of Evan's unit. They knew the damage must be severe for it to have spread this much, so they decided to perform a welfare check. Climbing to the second floor, they knocked on the apartment door and called Evan's name. After a few unanswered knocks, they decided to break it down. Inside, water was pouring from every sink, the bathtub, and even a hose that had been dragged in through a window. Evan was standing in the kitchen, frozen in place, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. "Evan, are you okay?" Daniel asked, stepping toward him cautiously while Ray moved deeper into the apartment to turn off the water. Evan didn't respond at first, trembling as if he couldn't even hear the question. When Daniel repeated himself, Evan finally muttered, "They're in the walls." "What do you mean?" Daniel asked, stepping closer. But Evan just kept repeating, louder each time, "They're in the walls." His voice rose to a frantic scream as tears streamed down his face. Meanwhile, Ray was checking the other rooms. When he entered the bedroom, he noticed something unusual in the closet, a faint, straight line etched into the wall. Initially, he thought it was nothing, but the more he stared, the more he realized it resembled the outline of a door. Ray's stomach sank. As Evan's shouting echoed in the background, Ray called Daniel over. "You need to see this," Ray said, his gun now drawn and aimed at the closet wall. Daniel joined him, his own gun ready, and together they approached the mysterious line. Ray carefully pulled at the wall's paneling, revealing a hidden compartment. What they saw froze them in place, 3 people crammed into the narrow space, their faces painted with strange symbols. Their wide, unblinking eyes stared back at the officers. "Out! Hands where we can see them!" Daniel shouted. One by one, the individuals crawled out of the wall, hands raised. By then, backup had arrived, and other officers helped detain the intruders while getting Evan out of the apartment. It turned out that the 3 people were part of a bizarre cult operating on the outskirts of town. They had been targeting Evan, exploiting his mental health struggles in an attempt to recruit him. Their plan had been to terrify him into submission, hiding in his walls to make him feel like he was losing his grip on reality. Evan, desperate to flush them out, had turned on all the water in his apartment, believing it was the only way to drive them away. To this day, Daniel and Ray agree that this call was the most unnerving one they've ever handled. The image of those painted faces staring at them from the darkness of the walls still lingers in their minds. I work night shifts as a deputy for the county sheriff's office in Blackwood County. I've been on the force for just over 2 years, and while I've had my fair share of odd calls, most of the time, it's routine stuff like breaking up bar fights or handling noise complaints. Blackwood isn't exactly a crime hotspot. One quiet night, I was dispatched to investigate reports of a loud scream coming from a house at the edge of a residential block. Usually, calls like these turn out to be arguments or someone having a bit too much to drink, but it was protocol to check. When I pulled up, the house was dark, all the windows unlit. A silver Honda Civic was parked in the driveway, so someone was clearly home. I double-checked the address to confirm I had the right place. As I approached the door, a neighbor emerged from his porch and waved me over. He said he'd heard a terrifying scream coming from the house and knew that the woman who lived there was usually alone. He mentioned that she sometimes had her boyfriend over, which made the situation a bit more concerning. I knocked on the door a few times but got no answer. I tried the doorknob, locked. Walking the perimeter of the house, I tested all the windows, and they were all shut tight, except for one in the back. It was wide open, just enough for someone to climb through. That raised a red flag. I radioed for backup and got the green light to proceed cautiously until they arrived. After climbing through the open window, I turned on the lights one by one, starting in the kitchen and making my way to the living room. The house was eerily silent. I called out to identify myself, explaining I was with the sheriff's office. No answer. I swept through the first floor thoroughly and found nothing. That left only the upstairs. Before heading up, I unlocked the front door for my backup. Then, carefully, I ascended the stairs. They creaked slightly under my weight as I moved up, my hand hovering over my holstered weapon. At the top, I was greeted by a hallway with 4 doors. I turned on the hallway light and called out again. This time, I heard a faint noise, a creak, from behind one of the doors. Taking a steadying breath, I opened it to find a bedroom. The light was off, but the glow from the hallway revealed a figure lying in bed, motionless under the covers. It was a woman. I stepped closer, calling out to her, but she didn't respond. When I was beside the bed, I noticed dark stains soaking through the sheets. My stomach dropped as I yanked the covers back and saw she'd been stabbed multiple times. To my relief, she was still breathing, though barely. I immediately called for an ambulance and relayed the situation. But something wasn't adding up. The creak I'd heard moments earlier couldn't have been her. She was unconscious. I scanned the room, my eyes landing on a closet door. My instinct screamed at me to check it. Gun drawn, I approached and threw it open. Nothing. Turning back to the bed, another thought struck me, the space beneath it. I crouched down, lifting the bed skirt, and locked eyes with a man hiding underneath. He wore a black mask that covered his nose and mouth. Adrenaline surged as I shouted, "Show me your hands." Slowly, he raised them, his expression blank. I ordered him out from under the bed, ensuring he wasn't holding a weapon. Once he was standing, I kept him in the corner, my gun trained on him until backup arrived. When my colleagues entered the house, I shouted for them to come upstairs. Only then did I move in to cuff the man. The woman was rushed to the hospital and, against the odds, survived her injuries. Later, we learned the man was her boyfriend. He'd discovered she'd been seeing someone else and, after confronting her over the phone, snapped when she ended things. It's a night I won't forget, not just because of what happened but because it reminded me how quickly things can escalate. Thankfully, we got there in time to save her. One night during a 12-hour overnight shift, I was dispatched to a call about a suspicious person roaming a neighborhood, knocking on doors, and speaking incoherently to residents or their doorbell cameras. The report described a middle-aged woman with long, wiry hair, holding something behind her back, yelling at people to open their doors and muttering to herself. When I arrived, the man who called showed me his Ring doorbell footage. In the video, the woman stared directly at the camera for minutes before pressing the doorbell. She spoke into the mic, demanding blood and laughing after each statement. When the homeowner threatened to call the police, she began hitting the door and clawing at the camera, attempting to rip it off. Afterward, she moved to the next house, and that's when the homeowner called 911. The footage was chilling, like a scene out of a horror movie. Even more disturbing was how she backed away, maintaining eye contact with the camera. Several units, including mine, began searching the area, but she seemed to have vanished. Then came the second call, a breaking and entering at a nearby home. A frightened caller, hiding upstairs, reported a woman had entered their house armed with a weapon. The caller's doorbell camera caught her again, staring into the lens before entering. My adrenaline spiked as I arrived at the scene alongside another unit. The front door was unlocked, making our entry swift but cautious. Guns drawn, we cleared the foyer and announced ourselves, ordering the intruder to come out. Upstairs, we heard screams for help. Following the sound, we found a couple locked in their bedroom. They were visibly shaken, claiming the woman had been banging on their door moments earlier. We searched the remaining rooms. In one of the darkened corners, I heard faint cackling. Flicking on the light revealed the woman sitting on the bed, staring at us with an unnerving grin. A large knife rested in her blood-soaked hand, and the bed was stained from her self-inflicted wrist wounds. Between her legs lay a blood-smeared doll, its face eerily pristine. She repeated the same chilling phrase about needing blood, laughing as we ordered her to drop the knife. Attempts to reason with her were futile. She seemed lost in her deranged world. Suddenly, she sprang from the bed, growling as she lunged at me with the knife raised. I had no choice. I fired twice, aiming for her arm. Both shots hit, and the knife fell as she collapsed, screaming in pain. We quickly cuffed her and called for an ambulance. She survived her injuries and was later declared not guilty by reason of insanity. She's now confined to a local mental institution. The incident left a lasting mark on everyone involved: the terrified neighbors, the couple who narrowly escaped harm, and the officers who faced the woman's unpredictable behavior. In my decade of service, I've never encountered anything as unnerving as that night.